We are live. Hello, everyone.
We are
Welcome
live.
back. Yeah, welcome back to another episode of Tech Talks with Santosh. So we are at episode 17, and today we have a really special guest, Tim Benniks. So I met Tim on Twitter, and that's how we got connected. So I
As
saw
we
him
do
talking.
nowadays.
Yeah, so I saw him talking about NuxtJS, and which really got me interested. And I thought of inviting him here, and he was generous enough to actually accept the invite and give us time. Thanks a lot,
Yeah,
Tim.
super cool, man. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this. You're already 17 episodes in. That's
Yeah,
great. Because this is, well, I do the same thing, so I know it's a lot of work. So props for
yeah.
you to keeping it up.
Thanks a lot. Tim. So let me just introduce Tim. Tim has worked in different agencies in Amsterdam and Paris over 15 years. So he has 15 years of experience. With, wow. So he has been lucky enough to work with global clients like Nike, Henken, Google, Tommy Hilfiger, EA Games, and many more. Even Procter and Gamble. So right now, Tim works as a director of web development at Welltech, where he animates an international group of amazing front-end developers. I think that would be fun. I,
Yeah.
uh, and next to actually agency job, team also likes to work in developer community by speaking at conferences, creating content, and representing startups like Cloudnaries, Prismic, and Next.js. It's all about quality, community, and building fancy websites. So I have seen him talking about Next.js, Cloudnary. He's also a Cloudnary MDE, if I'm not wrong, Tim.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And Next.js ambassador. So yeah, and
Yes.
of course, a demanding job needs balancing. So Tim plays guitar and loves family time with his wife, cat, and little corgi called Princess Nugget. Often pretty
Exactly.
good.
Actually, Princess Beckett is right here, but I cannot
Oh,
show you now. Oh wait, maybe she's like right there on the couch. I'll show you.
oh.
There she is.
Rest time.
Exactly. Thank you for the lovely intro.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, so cool. Tim, I have heard about different technologies over the years. Next is of
Mm.
course one of them. So we always get confused talking about next, and there is a nest as well. So can you just introduce what Next.js and what we can do with that?
Sure. So actually, Nux.js was born, built by the brothers Chopin in France, and they were basically just building kind of a universal app, as you call that in Node.js, right? So isomorphic code, backend and frontend can be, intertwined, and everything works front and backend. And they used Vue for this because that worked really well. And they kept on building similar things with the same smart defaults. And at one point, they were like, why not just make this into a framework that kind of helps you to be modular and go really fast? And actually, as long as you follow the basics, you won't make many mistakes because they have thought of a lot of things. So, in that respect, it's really quite close to Next, for example, where they're doing similar things, and they take out the sting and the complication of what you would see if you had to build like a Node.js application with an HTTP stack, with security, with cookies, all those complex things. They basically just did that for you. And then once that base was there, they put on a lot of extra things, right? So they also can do Jamstack-like things with a completely static generation. And in that sphere, they have put a lot of new things, and they're starting to look at what Next is doing and not copying, but like having similar things, like maybe figuring out how you can do serverless and API related questions. So yeah, it's basically just this framework on top of a library like Vue that helps you out, so you don't have to repeat yourself constantly while building something. That's what it comes down to.
So it does SSR server side rendering and as well as you can also do static side generation both.
Yeah, and you can also just say, I want to go to SPA mode, which it basically just skips that whole server-side rendering part and just makes it a Vue app like the Vue CLI would give you. But then again, wrapped in there, they have like their own Nuxt routing that wraps the Vue router. And there's all these extra little things you get in a framework that help you out, right? Middleware. Things.
Wow, that's nice. So I was just going through Next.js and I found that Next.js is actually a company. Is
Yes,
that
they
true?
are. This is correct. And they, for the longest time, they were just this group of people that were like, okay, we're doing this amazing open source things. Let's see how many users we can get. Let's see how the community responds. And that response has been amazing. So I think
Mm-hmm.
last year, when they actually managed to get some funding, there was a really
Mm-hmm.
big event, of course, because then they could actually hire people. And
Oh.
so they hired, let's say, Debbie O'Brien, for example, that does like, she teaches Nux to the community, and like they have extra developers on top, and people can get paid now. And suddenly you
Mm-hmm.
think skyrocket, right? Because there's so much more opportunity. So yes, NuxtJS is actually a company now.
Oh, that's great. I mean, a great success story, I would say. I mean, going
Oh,
from open
definitely.
source. Yep, that's nice.
Yeah, and
So, what
there's
are
a
the?
lot of big websites now built on it also, even that rely on things like Vue
Mhm.
Storefront, which is a really often used like accelerator to be able to do like really good e-commerce. It's now also
Mhm.
built on Nuxt because of the good bones it has. And you see it like also in the work that I do for enterprise, that Nuxt start to creep
Mhm.
in all of those front-end tools. So yes, that's really exciting. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, it's okay. So I was going to the next question. So what are the use cases? I mean, of course it's static chat generator. You can also do SPA. So what are the different websites which we have out there built on Next?
Well, because it has all these different approaches, there's
Mm-hmm.
so many use cases. I think the only one where it would not be, maybe it's actually more interesting to talk about where it's not a good use case, because in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
you use Vue, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of fits everywhere.
Right.
Maybe where it struggles at the moment is, well, it supports TypeScript, but it doesn't feel as native as it should. But with Vue 3, you get Nuxt 3 and everything is
Mm-hmm.
TypeScript. So at that point, it's just off to the races and run. But for the moment where it maybe is just not meant to be, is if you work in, let's say, enterprise, you have these huge programs like Adobe Experience Manager or maybe Sitecore. Those are kind of like those platforms that build a monolithic application. And I have to caveat that because these companies are also working on headless approaches, right? So then Nuxt would fit
Mm-hmm.
well. But actually, if you have the out-of-the-box default installs of those kind of systems, they render their own HTML, which
Mm-hmm.
means you're not going to use Vue.js to render that HTML because it's server-side render by nature, right? Like PHP used to do it in WordPress. So in that case, using Nuxt is kind of like two big systems that do the same thing and put them together. It might not be that interesting anymore.
Okay.
However, the moment you can grab an API, then the next thing is it just becomes the application you talk to, and then suddenly you can do everything again. Because we've seen in where I work, I cannot really mention the clients because that's NDA territory, but we have all these different approaches here where we have this huge luxury client and they have a pretty old school website that looks beautiful, right? But it was really hard to maintain and it had historically grown over maybe 10 years. Right. So at one point they needed a mobile website because before that it was Flash, right? So they became HTML, and now that thing was still existing with old Java server-side rendered stuff. And what we now did is they said, guys, we need to change this because if we do one release, it can take a long time because the whole ecosystem has to be released for every line of CSS that we change, right? This is just how that thing grew. And they asked us, why don't you just make a separated front end that we can release very often? And
Okay.
then, but we want to see results next month. So we were like, oh, okay, that's going to be interesting. So what we actually did, and that's where Nuxt was shining really a lot, it was amazing, is we actually did a redesign of the old stuff and the new stuff. So in like a couple of weeks, we redesigned all the legacy things. So the bosses, they saw a change, right? Because it looks nicer. And then
Yeah.
over time, we put something next to it, which was a Nuxt page. Like the homepage was Nuxt in the whole new ecosystem, talking to that same backend, but we just built like some small APIs. And then the rest was still the legacy. And then over time, we grabbed another page and another page and another page. And then so it's Nuxtifying that whole ecosystem now. And I think we have like a 20-fold performance increase. It's much more stable, much more simple to use. We were lucky, right? We were able to spend like 6 months on developer experience. Like, how
Oh.
does Nuxt work with Storybook? How do the
Mhm.
units fit in everything? How can we make a generator if we want to make one component that it's added to Nuxt, to the Vuex store, to Storybook, to a unit test runner, to CI, all of that. And Nuxt is in the center of all of it. And the lovely thing about Nuxt is it's so open. It's basically just a Node application. If you're a good
Mhm.
developer, just plug in anywhere. As
Oh.
many systems have, right? Next is the same, but in the Angular world, that's even more amplified, where it's completely open, and where you can see with Nuxt, it's slightly more scoped, which is good actually, because you can actually have people who have lower skills and a bit higher skills and put them all in, and it just works because the learning curve is really shallow.
Mhm.
That's where on the Angular side or the React side, it's a bit more hard. Then again, it's all fine. It's just we use the tool that we found, and that works really well.
Yeah.
And then we have other use cases that are completely static, right? Where we can,
Mhm.
for example, on that same project, we probably have some plans later on for pages that don't change as much because this is an e-commerce, right? Why don't we
Mhm.
just build some static Jamstack like pages, like certain like about pages or home page that don't change as much, that can actually just be static and then hosted in the edge of the CDN. So yeah, it kind of fits in multiple places.
Oh. So this is, I think, this is really nice use case because I've seen in case I want to migrate any application to Angular, right? So it's
Mm.
like you have to do it from scratch. You cannot actually do it like one by one. I mean, the incremental build which you mentioned, right? That's really cool.
It's
I
it's a
mean,
very
you can actually.
interesting approach. Yes, because you know what, in the world where I am with big enterprise, big clients, global stuff, like for example, one client could have 60 markets. You don't just change one thing. You kind of have to help them out to figure out to have a safe path to modern technology. Because these kind of clients are not going to do a big bang release because it's going to take you 3 years,
Yeah.
right? And they might have huge contracts with other vendors that they cannot just kill.
Safe path to modern. Yeah.
So it's really trying to figure out how to make it feel safe for the clients and then work together and do incremental stuff. And we've done this on many multiple occasions, but that's not specific to the technology. It's more specific to how you work with your clients, right?
Okay. So let's take another scenario, right? So I have seen in case of, I think this is something which we are going to discuss about anyways. This is related to performance stuff. So before, yeah, so and that's what our next question is. So I've seen there are multiple static site generators which are out there, right? So the
Sure.
biggest problem with static site generators are time, right? So they take, I mean, of course, you just add one more page and you have to rebuild everything, and sometimes it takes time. So how you can
Yeah.
actually optimize those in Next?
Well, this is kind of a big problem, right? We see this more and
Yeah,
more. And
yeah,
especially as sites get bigger. One fun fact is before we think this is terrible, because maybe you have 50,000 pages, it's going to take some time, right? But the funny thing is, let's say we have some .NET system or a Java system. On
hmm,
average, a build is like half an hour, maybe more,
yeah,
right? So I am used to clicking build and playing foosball, right? This is just these things take long. That's just the nature of the game. If you have a big monolith with all these software systems, they all need to sync
right,
and sync, blah, the whole thing. You need to reset the web server, all of that. So in my job, we're kind of used to like, oh, we're going to go live. Let's click the button and come back in half an hour or maybe an hour because scripts have to run, things like that. So now when you're not used to that and you say, hey, my next build took 10 minutes, whoa, that is long. It's like, actually, dude, it's really short. That's kind of a funny approach, but of course, it doesn't really scale if you have this a huge enterprise system. Let's say an enormous e-commerce, something like
hmm,
Walmart. That's not going to work statically because they have millions of pages, right?
yeah,
And so Nuxt did some stuff to mitigate this because not every release they're gonna rebuild all your bundles and all your pages. They
okay,
actually have a separation now, and I might not be the best person to completely explain how that works in detail, We'll have to have Puya on here to do that, who is more like the chief of the framework. But what they did is like if it's only a content change,
Mm-hmm.
will only just re-render that content rather than all the application stuff. Of course, when you
Oh.
change JavaScript, you're going to do everything. But that means if you separate those two and you have different builds, you can have lightning fast rebuilds because making the bundle, tree shaking, making the chunks, all of that takes generally the most time.
Yeah.
So generally, the way to go is to separate that. But of course, if you start to reach like 100,000 pages, it's kind of a different story. And then what I have some experience with nowadays, which makes it easier, is just go universal mode in Nux,
Mm-hmm.
SSR, right? And
Right.
then those pages are dynamic. And
Mm-hmm.
there's multiple approaches there to keep that fast also. So you can just use, let's say, an old school Akamai style CDN in front. You render it
Mm-hmm.
once, you give it to Akamai, it puts it on the edge, and there you go. But then it's not as dynamic, right? So there's also some options like a company, I'm not sure if you guys know them. They're called Move Web, MOOV Web. And they are in the similar league as, let's say, Netlify or Vercel, but they
Mm-hmm.
don't really do a bunch of let's build something static and just put it on the edge. No, they are a bit more sophisticated. And well, actually,
Mm-hmm.
Netlify will get there also, I think. But you can actually say if you have this huge website, for each route that I have, I will give you
Mm-hmm.
a specific CDN endpoint, and you can control as a developer how that CDN responds. What is the
Oh,
cache
okay.
purging time? What is the time to live? How dynamic is it? When does it refresh itself? How does it scale? And so they have like a really cool Nuxt plugin or a module. You put that in there, and then it takes over the routing. And
Okay.
then you can just say, so it kind of is micro CDNs or something like that. It's kind of a new concept. Like the fun thing is, the moment everything becomes cloud native and we are able to do code like we do, you and I, right? Suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
if there's a switch in your mind, you're like, oh, but this connects like that. And why not do a CDN endpoint for each of my routes or each of my controllers? And then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly you can scale to infinity while actually still using the universal Nuxt approach. Because let's say you get 100,000 hits on a URL a day. If you just make sure that it caches 10 minutes and then you update
Mm-hmm.
once every 10 minutes, it's going to be fast, right? The origin is not going to be touched too often.
Yeah.
And so there are these new companies standing up now to kind of solve the Jamstack at scale problem. And it's no longer
Mm-hmm.
Jamstack, or it might be because it's still cached in the CDN, but it's not a
Mm-hmm.
static output. It's actually still a dynamic route. And of course, guys like Vercel and Netlify are starting to do similar things where you actually have a Lambda function that functions as your SSR.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this kind of stuff is starting to happen, but MoveWeb basically built that as their core.
Wow, that's
And
really
so
good.
there you go. And so it is all scalable. You just have to feel the pain and then find out what you have to do. That's where I come from, right?
That's awesome. What is the company name you mentioned?
It's called MoveWeb. Wait, I'll type it.
Moved Web. Yeah, sure.
There we go. It's kind of funny because they're right up there with the likes of Netlify and Vercel, but they're just not as known in our community just yet. But for example, these guys are one of the bigger sponsors for Nuxt, for example. And I think they
Oh.
might also sponsor Next. I'm not. I'll have to check that, but I think they at
Mm-hmm.
least have a Nuxt and a Next plugin to go in. I'm not sure where they stand on the Angular stuff, but they might just have that as well. Looking at how technologically advanced they are, they probably have something like that also.
Wow. Yep, I can see example. Get started with Angular, get started with React, Storefront, Gatsby.
There you
Wow.
go.
And
Yeah.
next,
Yeah, so it's
that's
a
pretty
very
good.
interesting company that for some reason, it wasn't on my radar until I had a demo from them at my work, and I was like blown away because we do stuff at scale. So why not just make sure that you can do all the dynamic stuff you want to do without the drawback of the Jamstack? Well, the only drawback there, of course, is scale, right? So yes, interesting.
Oh, that's cool. Thanks for letting us know. I mean, I was not aware of this website, and
No, and I'm only recently aware that, like, suddenly when you have a paradigm shift, right, where you have CDN Edge very close for everybody to use, you have integrated Lambda functions. So many things become possible that we, as like, I am old school, like, right, I've done this for many, many years. I come from the place where you had PHP render a page and that's it. And then jQuery came and everything
yeah,
changed. Like, that's how
yeah,
old I am. So I used to be quite stuck in that one way. It's our direction, and now everything basically exploded anywhere, which is cool. Our job is going to
yeah.
be fun, man. This next year.
Yeah, actually. So I agree. I mean, the speed at which web has grown was like no one expected it to.
Yeah. Well, at least not me. And it's true that there are smart people out there that make these kind of companies and make that work. Because I'll
Yeah,
definitely use them and figure out how to do those kind of large systems at scale. Right? It's going to be interesting.
that's cool. Okay. So of course we spoke about this build issues which we get generally in static site generator. Is there any benchmark which is available for any by any chance for sorry, this Next.js? I mean, I've seen benchmark from different vendors, but is there any where I can refer to?
I personally do not know. What would it actually benchmark? Like how long the build time takes?
Yeah. How long? So let's say I have 10K pages. How long it takes to actually build those 10K pages?
Yeah. So I know that Nuxt is actually pretty decent in its speed, but I haven't compared it to Next. I personally do not know because, like I said before, I'm used to like 30-minute builds from my
Yeah.
.NET compiler, right? So
Yeah.
I'm happy with anything I see at the moment. Where I see where generally all those systems are slowest is actually Webpack itself, right? Because it has to
Yeah.
pre-compile everything and then make the bundles and determine where do I do like the tree shaking and all. That's actually the hardest bit. So I'm thinking something like I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but like you have something called Feet. I haven't used. Been
Yeah.
working on that.
Yeah. So we spoke about Wait a few episodes back. So Alice was our guest, and she's in chat as well.
Yeah,
So
I
we did
saw her. Hi,
spoke about.
Alice. Nice to meet you. And Le Bolos is. Are we? This is kind of a French thing. So Santosh, I'm not sure if we want to be bolos.
I'm not aware of what.
No, it's good that you're not aware. Maybe we can find a picture. Elise, please reach out and explain to us what Le Bolos means. It's gonna,
Sure.
anyways.
Yeah.
No, but they're kind of replacing what Webpack does, and of course, Webpack will catch up and do the same things. Let's be honest; it's such a good tool. But there are different approaches to like the ES modules first on
Yeah.
like building it a different way, and I think it's gonna go much faster. And our bottleneck is going to be how many files I'm going to be able to write to disk, right? Because it's static generation,
Yep.
right? But I think maybe I just made my own bridge to the next question, which is how to optimize the bundle size.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah. So meanwhile, if we can take one question from Saurabh.
Yeah,
So
I
Saurabh
saw.
is in. Yeah. So let's take this question. His question is, so we have like more next and next. Can we see a feature like where we just use the static site generators or this universal thing, right? Only for most of the use cases.
Oh, so is the question that we'll have more Next and Nuxt approach like
Yep.
building websites? Well,
Yeah.
the thing what's so nice about these systems is they kind of take the complexity out of your process. Like I remember back in the day when we had, let's say PHP, right? We had to build our own MVC controllers.
Yep.
We did. It's all good. But then those were diehard backend people who did the routing for us, the caching, the templates, all of that. And as front
Right.
enders just tagged along, kind of. And now what you see happening, it's so much more open and people are more full stack, shall we say. That you kind of have to, as a front end developer or a web developer, start to understand the HTTP stack. You have to start
Yep.
to understand What is HTTP2? How does multiplexing work? Or how do you route and how do you handle sessions? How do you scale it up? There's all these complexities, not to mention security. Suddenly,
Right.
front-end devs need to know all these things. And you know what? A lot of people like you, you will know, but a
Yeah.
lot of people don't, right? So I'm lucky enough to have been along the way that I have gone out of my way to code some .NET and to code some Java and to kind of feel. I'm by far not a specialist, but I kind of know how the web works. I've had that opportunity. But a lot
Yeah.
of new people that come in, they don't have that knowledge. So
Yeah.
you should be super happy there's something like Next or Nuxt that took the complexity out of all that. And if you use Nuxt, you know you are safe. You put it on a server, it just works. Of course, everything is hackable if you really want to, let's be honest. But at least you know that when you use those kind of systems that's starting to become industry standard, especially Next, that's still bigger, it's based standard if you want to build an application with React that has a little bit more than just the React scripts, right? Or just Vue CLI. You just take that thing and it just, you know, it will work. And so it accelerates and it makes it industry standard. And if you use a tool like this and suddenly there's a new update of some sort of new feature, it just works because you use the tool.
Yeah.
And I keep on saying to use these kind of industry standard things because, well, I work in a place where software is huge, where scale is enormous. If you have done something custom to something, and suddenly the client says, "Yeah, let's update to version 8 of whatever," and I have to say, "No, I cannot because I built this crazy thing 2 years ago." They're like, "Yeah, you're stupid." Right? Now we're going to have to spend 1 million changing that. And so this is the way I look at it, and I think it's going to be more like, for example, there's a nice parallel here, like when Vue came and React came and Angular came. Actually, Angular was one of the first, right? So when I
Yeah.
looked at that, like things that were reactive were really hard to build back in the day. When I came from vanilla JavaScript, doing DOM manipulation was hard back in the day because of different browsers, right? So a jQuery or an Angular just solved that for us. Now we don't even think about that anymore. I think that's what Next and Nuxt will do for applications, right? We don't have to think about all this weird complexity anymore. It just works. And then you have more time for UX, for design, for storytelling, for amazing technology that is a little bit crazy. You suddenly have time to think about those things. So yes, I think it will grow a lot. All right, I hope it's becoming commonplace. So it doesn't. It helps developers not to have to think about the complex issues anymore, and doing more things that matter to the end user.
That's Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So which is of course our bundle size optimization.
Yeah, so this is kind of funny, right? A while back, I was working with someone called Lucy, and I need to be able to let me read her last name because I'm never able to say that correctly because it's French. Actually, she told me it's German, spoken like a French. It's a bit hard, so it's like Lucy Haberer. I'll put it in the chat because you guys should follow her for sure. So I just gave it to you in your private chat, Santosh, so you can share it. This is her Twitter handle. This is a young and amazing developer, and she works at Prismic, which is a
Okay.
really cool headless CMS. And so we'd been chatting a little bit, and she said, "Yeah, I wrote this article. Tim, can you read it for me to see if it makes sense?" And while I was reading it, it was blowing my mind. You have those things sometimes, right? That happens sometimes. And
Yeah.
so I read that, and the fun thing about all this is that basically, if you think about Jamstack, go full Jamstack. That's very important because what we tend to do is, let's say, if we do SSR, right? We have we have, let's say, a server-side rendered app, data mapping things from JSON to HTML, or let's say code highlighting. Those things we do in SSR because that's how we
Yeah.
used to do that. But we might use a JavaScript library for it. But then when you go to Jamstack, we would generally grab just the content from the CMS, and then in the controller, in the JavaScript, you basically map that HTML or that JSON to HTML. You would
Right.
then do highlighting of things, like all of that mapping stuff. And the funny thing is, why would we do that in the client when we generate the website? Right? When you generate the JavaScript, you don't want to give the whole bundle of, let's say, Cloudinary to a user. You just want to give it the image that you came up with. You don't want to do all that work in the browser, in the client. So it's kind of fun because Lucy is young. She came into the game while all this was happening. She looked at it. It's like, Tim, you're stupid. Why are you actually doing code highlighting, syntax highlighting in JavaScript on the client when you're doing a Jamstack website? Why don't you just do that on the server while you render the thing? Like, oh boy. I felt kind of like, oh man, am I getting old maybe? But the funny thing about this is she kind of told me, like, in Nuxt, you have something called an async render function or
Okay.
async data function, right? So what you do, you grab your data in that function. Once the data is there, then it starts to render your view. So it kind of helps you to do on each page. You can do an AJAX call. You get the data in, and it's all in a promise, right? It's async. You have an async await. It comes back, and when it comes back, it renders for you the page. It's very easy. That's nice with Vue. When you do stuff in that function, it's SSR. And then whatever JavaScript you use there does not get sent to the end user in the bundle. So if you have syntax highlighting, if you have like a whole Cloudinary image management suite with JavaScript, if you have the Prismic or Contentful, their JSON to nice HTML kind of converters, right? There's all these SDK tools you always use. If you use those on the server side, so in the async data function, then they don't end up in the bundle for the end user. So the only thing that ends up in the bundle for the end user is just my click handlers and things like that, and my Giggle analytics maybe. But not all full SDK of Algolia search. You don't need that for the end user. You just want to do a search on your server. When you generate something, the page comes out, and you want to give as little JavaScript to the user as possible. And so when she came up with that idea, I was like, mind is blown. And so I reduced my bundle by 80%, I think, on my
Wow.
website. And
80% is even.
I'll send you the YouTube video of it, and you can put it in the chat because, well, let's not put it in the chat because people need to stay in your video. We'll send it later. But
Sure.
that is, and so there's multiple ways to reduce your bundle. Like that was one of them, right? So do everything on the server at generation time. But then there's also another, because, for example, that Algolia thing, which is a really, really good search engine, I use that to filter my videos and such. They actually they have a really good Vue components that do like 90% for you. You just have to style it a bit, and everybody's happy. The thing is, that's a really, really big bundle. Like, I think you can get it down to quite small, but you need to go very precise. And I just couldn't get it there with the stuff I needed. So what Lucy and I did is we figured out, like, why don't I make a Lambda function slash API in Vercel, just a node function that I query myself, and in there it does the Algolia search. So the whole SDK and all the components it needs, it does it there. And I basically built a 50-line search engine with Vuex state management myself. I didn't need much more, right? So I was able to remove probably 450 kilobytes of JavaScript, un-gzipped, right? So not gzipped, but it's still a lot.
Yeah,
Because I didn't have to use those components anymore because I put it all on the server side, right? So second thing to make sure your bundles are smaller is just abstract things away into Lambda functions. And, in the Algolia thing, it wasn't as cool because I had hoped it was better, because Algolia has some really smart stuff going on in their front-end components that figure out, okay, the user is, let's say, in Paris. Let me just connect to the closest data center, right? The closest CDN. And they do that with some client-side magic. And when I used my Lambda function, it's anywhere. It's on the Vercel cloud. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in AWS. And so I couldn't use that stuff. So I had a delay of like 300 milliseconds for every call.
Oh.
But I added some caching, and it's kind of fine now. But so
Mm-hmm.
there's some drawbacks. It's not always as easy. But yeah, there are definitely ways to reduce the amount of JS you send to the client. I think Next.js even has it now in such a way, if you don't need JS for a page, it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
even send. And I'd like to see something like that in Nuxt also. And probably the guys, when they watch this, are like, yeah, we're working on it. Probably. I don't know. But like a lot of pages, like a blog post, it doesn't need JavaScript, right?
Actually.
But Nuxt has this amazing ability that if you render a page and then you click on a link, it uses a Nuxt link, right? So it goes into single page app
Oh.
mode. So
Mm-hmm.
when you go to the next page, it's a really nice animation. And for that, of course, you need the JavaScript. You can also preload those bundles, and there's all this
Mm-hmm.
really smart stuff going on. But so it's not a real static website. It's actually server-side rendered. And the moment you go on
Mm-hmm.
subsequent links, it's actually a single page app, which
Yep.
makes it great. But also you need a bit more JavaScript. So if you want even less bundle sizes, you should maybe have an option to turn that off as well. And then every link is just an A tag that refreshes the page. That's another option you could have.
That's cool.
Loads of things. I think there's actually another question.
Yeah.
Oh, you
So
found it.
Gaurang has this question. So is it good to go with SPA or SSR like Next or Next for e-commerce?
Wow. Well, that's a very interesting question, and there's different approaches to this. I've worked with e-commerce systems that were completely SPA, and it was fine because it was easier to build and it was quite quick. We didn't need servers and stuff. But e-commerce and SEO, search engine optimization, are basically huge, right? That's like hand in hand. You need to be able to be found on Google with a product. You find the
Right.
product, you click buy, you run. And so if you have a single page app, you also like it works well, but you don't really have the rendered
SEO.
HTML there, the SEO. But it's not just that, because if you, let's say, this is what I always say, and some people might find this not so fun, but you don't have JavaScript until you have it, right? When you have a slow connection, like right now, I'm actually on a farm. There's not much connection here, right? Now I'm on my phone, it's quite good, but if I'm just on the normal Wi-Fi here, it's ADSL. So when I go to a website and there is, let's say, an Angular application, it takes a good 15 seconds to load all that JavaScript,
Yep.
which means if you don't have any server-side rendering, you don't see anything for 15 seconds until that JavaScript was downloaded, parsed, put in memory, and given to the browser, right? And so that's the drawback of having an SPA. If you have a relatively slow connection and you don't see anything on the page that can be hydrated, people will just go away from your website. And
Agree.
that's just, even if it's 1 second of white page and then everything comes in, people are gone. And you start to see this at scale, right?
Definitely.
Even I'm not even sure which website it was, but with like 100 milliseconds of delay, they had like 10% less sales or something.
Wow.
So please use SSR when you do e-commerce.
Yeah.
That would be a tip from Uncle Tim.
Yeah, even I agree here because my last client, so they were creating one e-commerce kind of application. So initially they went with SPA, and but of course it was hard to actually get this SEO thing correct,
Yeah.
and so there are a lot of challenges. So finally we
Yeah.
decided to use. Yeah, so we decided to go with Angular Universal because it was
Sure.
ready. I mean, it was in Angular, so we decided to go with Angular Universal because it's just a single command, right? So we just need to run
Oh,
a single
nice.
command. So it was
This
done.
is the
But yes,
magic of Angular, man. You always have this kind of stuff.
yeah. But of course, it has its own challenges.
It clearly does, but that's for
Yeah,
another time, I think.
yeah, for sure.
I think Elise has another question also, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in case you want to read out.
Oh, sure. So how much harder is developing with SSR than without? Does Nuxt handle most of the things, or do you have to configure the SSR yourself, like you would with implementing lazy loading? So at least that's actually a great question, because back in the day when it just all started, SSR was pretty hard, right? because in the SSR environment, you don't have browser APIs, or not really.
Right.
So if you do anything with the window, anything with, well, anything a
Look.
browser would do, it will just
Yeah.
die. So you have to do
Yeah.
defensive coding, right? On the SSR, you don't know if it's going to be a desktop or a mobile or a screen size. So what do? You build for mobile, and then you hope the hydration is actually going to be desktop, right? Those things are complex. So do as much as you can with CSS, basically, in that scenario. But like also lazy loading, you probably don't want to be doing that on SSR. You might want to just render the image tag, and then on hydration it loads, right? But there's a difference in how SSR deals with that. I would always stick with browser like standards. For lazy loading right now, you just have an image tag, you put a width and a height so the ratio can be calculated, and you do loading equals lazy. If you just do that, SSR will not complain. Things just work fine. So there are some issues with SSR on the server end of the thing. So this is what we see all the time. We have to do SSR, right? So we work on everything, and then people tend to test, let's say, in Storybook, or they tend to test locally on development mode. The thing gets deployed, everything dies. So
Yeah.
my tip would be always test everything you build in SSR first. If it works, be happy, right? So make sure you have if and else. Like if is server, you might want to code something different than if it's on the client. And so yes, nobody said it was easy to do this job, and it just got harder. However, in Nuxt and also Next, and I cannot really speak for Angular. I don't know everything there. I haven't used it in a long time, but these systems, they tend to have really good defaults. And if you they give you just error messages and they tell you you're doing something strange, like especially with Nuxt, it can actually tell you in the console that your hydrated HTML is different from the stuff you did on the server, and then you're going to have to investigate and see why. So it's not as crazy anymore now.
That's cool. I mean, in Angular also, it's you have to do if else, so you don't have any other option. But it
Yeah,
fails. I
exactly.
mean, it fails on build. So in case, let's say you use any uh, browser API in your SSR, right, and you forget put in your if else clause that you are running on server or client, so it will fail on the build. That's a good thing about Angular. So you don't have to actually
Exactly.
deploy.
Yeah, it's
So
very strict. I love the strictness of it. With
yeah.
TypeScript, you're going to be cool. I think maybe Elise also meant like lazy loading modules and components. And that is also not always as easy. And I think now in Vue.js, as I know for Vue and for React, sorry, I don't know so much about Angular, but
Yeah,
in
it's
React,
fine.
you can actually do react.lazy and load stuff
Yeah.
on the client. And in Vue, you also have components for like lazy hydration. So you might actually SSR something, but you can choose not to hydrate it. And you have a client only tag in HTML or Nuxt or whatever you want to call it. It's like a component for client only. And in that you can also decide to lazy load a component with a webpack chunk or something like that. So there's a lot of different things, and Nuxt and also Next, they have these smart defaults that just do it for you. Like when you have a page in Nuxt, it makes an automatic chunk for you in that page. And then it can look at the router links and preload the chunks for coming pages if you want to.
Wow,
So it
it's
has
cool.
all that kind of fun stuff. So I don't see that often that the SSR goes wrong in the Nuxt. In React projects, I've seen it all the time because we didn't use Next, and it's like a different kind of integration, and that was really tricky. But you learn and you change, you adapt.
For sure. Okay, so let's move on to the next question, probably our last. So, how to create large scale sites with Next? So,
Well,
it's
I think we've discussed quite a bit on that subject just now, right? So I think if you follow the rules of how Nux especially was built, kind of use things like middleware, use things like their module system, and keep your front end as simple as it can be. I generally even want my front end to be like super stateless.
Mm-hmm.
and do smart stuff in APIs, and use the store for certain things. But as long as you keep the front end stupid, that's what I always say, you're generally fine at scale. Um, and yeah, use kind of the tools they give you and actually understand how the system works. And like
Mm-hmm.
we've done huge scale stuff with Nuxt. And if you think about like the bundle size and the optimization of the static site rendering, like we just discussed, actually you're going to be fine if you just follow their rules. And if there's something specific, you just build a module, you hook into the events on build or whatever, and you can do anything you want basically with Next. So it just becomes a node application. And then
Okay.
suddenly you everything is open, which is also means it's
Mm-hmm.
also harder. Right. So if you don't know how to code Node.js stuff, yeah, it's going to be tricky to know if you don't understand the event loop, these kind of things. How do you scale to 20 servers? There's some stuff to be done, but that's just general,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but like we've had these kind of crazy systems where we, for every request we did, we had to look up a Java session ID. And so Java gives you a session ID, and then it can remember, well, in this system at least, it can remember what you were doing. That also means if it actually has a load balancer, that session
Mm-hmm.
ID is across different nodes, right? So
Notes, yeah.
the moment we would actually run a Nuxt page, we would have to check and ask the system, what is my ID? Give it to me, and then do the rest of the page, because otherwise you get somebody else's shopping basket. That's pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we were like, oh boy, how do we build that? And then we just, we just called Sebastian from Nuxt, and he's like, yeah, but we have modules for that. We have middleware for that. You can just use your server stuff. And that is, they have basically, they didn't think of everything at the beginning, but over time now, I'm completely confident using this tool for the biggest stuff that I have to build. And even if it's not that clear what to do, they will just help you with it. They're really open.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or you just build something yourself, which we have done. Like we had like very close storybook integration that didn't really work. So we were really like working around it and building React code in Storybook to get it to work. And now
Mm-hmm.
they quite recently, I think half a year ago, a super nice connection with Storybook based on all the stuff that we figured out, right? So they're super close to their community.
Oh, that's good. Cool. I think Elise has a question.
Yeah.
You can plug next with any node app. Is that true?
Yes, I'm not sure if you should do that, but yes, of course. It's just it's actually an extension on how a Node application is built, right? They have routing and they have some smart
Mm-hmm.
default. It's just a Node app. Of course, if you use Express, you can use Nuxt with Express or Nuxt with some other libraries. I don't think they recommend it nowadays, but back in the day, I think like a year ago, when you do like create Nuxt app on the CLI, you can even choose all your frameworks, like Express or whatever else was there. You could use it. I don't think that is the case now. They have something themselves, but yeah,
Okay.
you can do that. If you want to use Vue as a front end framework, just plug Nuxt in, and it can take over your routing and pages and SSR and stuff. Sure.
That's good. So I think our opposite maybe customize anything in next. I think that's possible, right? That's what we spoke about.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah, like what they really want to do is get out of your way. So you have to be able to, you
Mm-hmm.
can just code anything you want basically. And that's nice.
That's good. Okay, so team, we are done with all the questions, and thanks for answering those questions in chat.
Sure.
That was really helpful. So, anything you want to promote here? So maybe in case you have anything to share with us.
Um, well, as this has a bit of the context of Nuxt, um, I would really love to say how well these Nuxt guys have been doing work in the community, and like
Mm-hmm.
appointing people to be ambassador. I'm lucky to be one of them, but also like their new stuff about how they do documentation and how we have meetings together. So that's a really cool thing. And so check that out. And
Mm-hmm.
also we have Debbie O'Brien who works at Nux, and she just started a YouTube channel all
Oh.
about Nux stuff. And the cool thing is she just takes a feature, relatively
Mm-hmm.
simple, explains it in like 8 minutes, and you just get it. And so because of that, your niche is really good. Just like your niche, Santosh, you have a good niche also, this stuff. And so people watch that and they get a lot of benefit from it. So you should go there. And then while you're at it, just look at my YouTube channel also. However, my channel is a bit different. I have a bit more longer form content. It goes a bit deeper into certain subjects. Sometimes it's really technical, but I also do stuff like how to be a good leader or what to do as a developer and things like that. Maybe I can just, you can share it in the chat maybe. That would be super cool. Oh yeah, just my website, all good, which is built in Nuxt, of course.
Oh, that's cool. It works pretty fast.
It's crazy. I've really updated it a lot. Like this has been because I have to sell this stuff to clients, so I have to go deep and actually understand everything.
Oh.
So my website is running on Prismic as a CMS, and it is hosted on Vercel CDN as a static Jamstack website. And it uses a whole bunch of Lambda functions for search and syncing my search between my CMS because the index has to be updated, things like that. So you can find a bunch of my videos there. And of course, you can from there go to YouTube, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me push something. That's cool. Promotion. Man.
I mean, of course, you shared the content, so you deserve that. So I think we don't have any question in chat either. So that's it. That's it for the day. And thanks a lot again, Tim, for your time.
Thanks, man.
And
super cool.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us. So on closing notes, we will have another episode next Friday. So next Friday, we are going to talk about another framework. So we are going to explore Svelte with one of my friend. He's from Germany, Matthias. I think if I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Yes.
So
correct.
yeah. So he'll be talking about Svelte a lot and really. And after that, we are planning to have 2 more episodes. So we'll finish at 20 episodes this year. So let's see how it goes,
Nice,
and
man.
then we'll meet next year.
I'm gonna really check out next week because I really love Svelte. I've seen some amazing stuff built with it. So cool, man.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone, and have a great day.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.